Let's talk about options for high availability and fault tolerance, assuming a ShoreTel deployment in VMware. So this is a high availability cluster, and let's assume that we have a ShoreTel running here on this system. Now, this host has got a heartbeat with this secondary host over here. So this guy is primary, this guy is secondary, and they're exchanging heartbeats. If there's a VMware tools going on, there's also a heartbeat exchange between this primary and the ShoreTel application running here. But should this ShoreTel instance fail, what will happen is a new instance will spin up over here on the secondary host. It'll just launch another copy of that VMware machine right here. Okay, so this guy goes down and it comes up over here. That's high availability. Now clearly there's some downtime associated with that, but if you use that poor man deployment we talked about, the previous nugget on this subject, this guy goes down, this guy will pick it up, and the downtime is associated with how long it takes to relaunch the machine here. So you've got to calculate that, but that is the definition of high availability. It takes place within a cluster, so a cluster would be 2 or more ESXi hosts, and they would exchange heartbeats, and should one instance fail of a virtual machine on a primary server, it would then launch another copy on the secondary server. So this exchange of heartbeats is important. So let's come on. Let's take a look at another example here. Now, over here we have our storage, and if you've been following along, it's been recommended that when you're setting up your ShoreTels, you point to a shared storage. So when these machines are relaunching, so you've got a ShoreTel instance running here, and when the heartbeat fails, it's going to relaunch on a second machine. Now that describes basically the concept of high availability. So we have a management network, we have a storage network, perhaps we have our vMotion network, and we have our vCenter server somewhere on the deployment. So we'll take a look at that, but the specific points you want to make note of is that you want not only heartbeats between the two machines in your cluster that are providing the high availability, you want a heartbeat between the instance of ShoreTel running on this ESXi and the host. And the reason for that is there's a concept called isolation. So let's say the heartbeats between these two machines over the management network, there's a problem. This guy, the secondary guy, is not getting the primary heartbeats, and he says, whoops, that must be down. Therefore I should create another instance. But there's an alternative to immediately launching that, and it's to consider that perhaps there's a problem on the management network. Perhaps that's where the problem is, and that this machine is actually still running a copy of the headquarters server. So what will happen is we will also do a storage heartbeat, and we will check to see if this guy is still writing to this storage. And if it is, we will consider this to be an isolation. Not a real failure, it's just that this guy has become isolated. It's some of the subtleties of the high availability model that you need to consider. Now, in fault tolerance, we've got an entirely different situation. When we create fault tolerance, we actually have a second instance of the ShoreTel headquarters server running on the second machine. So the primary machine is here, it's running, and if there's any failure detected, then immediately there is no downtime, there's no need to relaunch, it just takes over. And they have been replicating data back and forth between them this entire period. So there is no downtime, there's no launch of the OS. The OS is already up. Application data, voice messages, any real-time activity that were happening on the primary machine, should it fail, the fault-tolerant instance will take over. And we speed these processes up in both the high availability model as well as the fault tolerance model by making sure that we have the storage on a separate system. So if you think about it, in your normal ShoreTel deployment, you install the OS, and then you install the application. The application is running and writing data to the C drive. We don't want to have to relaunch all of that stuff when we relaunch it on the second machine. Let's keep the data over here in a SCSI environment in a separate network. And this way we can check for isolation by checking to see if we're seeing writes, read writes to the data. And if so, we'll consider that an isolation, not a failure. So high availability will copy and launch a new instance of that machine on the secondary server. In fault tolerance, we actually have data replication going back and forth between the primary active copy of the ShoreTel headquarters server and the backup, the fault-tolerant image that is already running in the background. Now, if you remember, we're running this in a lab environment, so I actually created vCenter. Come on, there you go. Okay, so vCenter here is running as a Linux appliance. You can get this as a Windows machine, but I downloaded the Linux appliance. So I've got two ESXi machines running, and I'm also running vCenter, which you will need to do high availability and fault tolerance, and I'll show you what that looks like. vSphere web client itself. So it looks like this. You log in with administrator at vSphere.local, and the password that you used when you set up the original deployment. So I download, by the way, a evaluation copy of vSphere. I downloaded the ISO, and so this is why this is a unlicensed version just for playing around. And understand, this is the interface to the vSphere environment, and vCenter enables you to administer to all of your VMware machines in your various data centers and your various clusters, rather than bringing up the VMware client. You would use the vSphere web client to see all your machines. So in the evaluation version, you get the vCenter. but you also get things like the hybrid cloud services, the vCenter orchestrator, and the two features that you're interested in this discussion, which is high availability and fault tolerance. Now, for about $560, you can get a standard license for ESXi that'll support 3 hosts and 6 processors. Plus, it gives you a copy of vCenter. But the vCenter, that copy would not have HA and FT. That's additional cost for that. But in the evaluation version here, you'll see all of the neat toys. So let's go to hosts and clusters. And the concept here is that you have created what's called a data center. And here, I'll go ahead and show you how that's done. We'll go ahead and add a new data center. And let's assume that this is the western region. Okay, so the vCenter is actually looking at, here's the vCenter, and it's looking at your different clusters. So we've got a cluster here that's in a data center in the central region, and we've got one in the western region. Let's go to the central region here. Okay, if we right-click on the data center, you can see that we can add hosts, we can add a new data store to the cluster, add a new distributed switch. You want to get your network sorted out between your regions, your data centers and your clusters within the region, right? So at the cluster level, if we go there and right-click, go to Settings, it'll bring up this screen, or you can go to Manage Settings, and right here it says vSphere High Availability. Now this is not on by default. You actually have to go edit it and turn it on. And once you turn it on, you're enabling host monitoring, admission. Think of this as a reservation-like system. So under host monitoring, we can set up our monitoring of our network heartbeats, choose the different options for high availability, how quickly we want to restart or relaunch, the level, is it high, low, so forth. Do we want to leave that machine powered on? So this gets into the discussion, as we have already mentioned, about possibly having an isolation failure, where the machine isn't really down, the heartbeats just failed, but because we're also checking storage, we know that it's still alive. Admission control has to do with setting up reservations for resources. So, you have to plan your resources such that if I have, 100% utilization of this machine and 100% utilization of this machine, and this guy fails and we need to relaunch him someplace, if I haven't reserved resources equal to the amount that this guy is going to need, we're going to have a problem. So it does take some planning. So at the cluster level is where you turn on your high availability. Here is where we would be, we go down here to all settings. This is where you would turn on fault tolerance. And at that point, when you're activating fault tolerance, you need to understand that when we were setting up the lab and we used thin provisioning of our disk resources and allocate memory as required, as soon as you turn on fault tolerance, what's going to happen here is going to blow out the full requirements for this machine as it creates the backup machine. Okay, so high availability is just gonna, if this guy dies, he'll relaunch him here on this other ESXi host. But in fault tolerance, if this guy we thin provisioned 80 gigabytes, keep in mind thin provision means maybe we're only using 20, so that's all we're going to set aside right now, and we'll add to it as needed. You just switch on fault tolerance, thin provisioning goes out the door, and if that machine had 80 gigs, it's going to take 80 gigs. So make sure that you've planned that out in your thinking about resource reservations on the other machines. So I'm not going to turn that on. Again, the goal here was just to get the discussion about options for ShoreTel failover, and you're going to have to determine which level of failover is acceptable to you and at what cost. I believe that the subject, when looked at within the realities of business continuity, are such that you may just get by real well with the option one that I described in a previous video. High availability by itself is not going to be real useful, but if you do it within the context of having that DVM at the same level, then we have a fairly painless short window in which the headquarters relaunches. But if you really need it and you want to establish 0 or microseconds of downtime, then you're going to go with the fault tolerant option and the costs associated with that. So to do that, you will need vSphere, high availability, and fault tolerance. I hope you have found this informative, and I thank you for viewing.